If you guys want affordable housing, you need to move to Miami. I mean, where else are you gonna find estates on the water like this? You know, 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom, 7,000 square feet for the low price of only $28 million, guys. I don't know anywhere else that has deals this good right now. So if you're looking for something that cheap, make sure you look at Miami. Clearly that was a joke for anyone who didn't really get that. By the way, what do you guys think of my lumberjack look today? You know, it's kind of cool when the weather's nice and cool like this. I get to wear something different for a change. It's kind of nice to wear some real clothes instead of always just the shorts and the tank tops. That's comfy, but this is cozy too when it's nice and chilly outside. So it's nice to just change it up. I don't need the sunglasses. It's not even that bright out here, you know. Otherwise I'm normally like squinting, trying to fight the sun in my eyes. So it's nice out here. Now, we've been covering all sorts of topics related to inflation, the cost of living, the housing market. And when I saw this one today, it really just like was an eye-opener for me. And that is that 20 million Americans are behind on paying some form of their utility bill right now, whether it's the electric bill, the gas bill, the water bill, or all of it. That's 1 out of every 6 homes, guys. That's a lot of people that are behind on those payments right now. And, you know, at a time like this when inflation is raging and the cost of everything is up, that also includes energy, okay? And energy prices are through the roof more than a lot of things are right now. And not only do people have to spend more of their money on just the regular cost of living, but now, because energy prices are so high, a lot of it has to now go towards a higher electric bill, a higher gas bill, a higher water bill, or all of it. And people are just being bombarded from all angles right now when it comes to expenses with their daily lives. It was reported that an estimated $16 billion is owed in utilities right now, and this is an average of about $788 per household that is behind on the bills right now. So, you know, we talked about people not being able to afford a $400 or $600 emergency depending on what your income is or whatever, if you're living paycheck to paycheck. But as you can see, this is an even bigger emergency. This is not a $400 emergency. This is an $800 emergency that people can't afford right now. And obviously this couldn't come at a worse time given the fact that this is probably one of the coldest winters we've seen in a long time across the world. And at a time when people need the electricity and the gas to heat their homes the most, it's going to be costing the most, and people are going to be racking up these bills. And unfortunately, the problem is, guys, when you don't pay your utility bills after a few months, they shut them down. Okay, like some states have laws where they can't shut off your gas in the winter time or your water or whatever. But when spring comes or summer, whenever the threshold for the temperatures come out where they can actually turn these utilities off on you, they're going to. Like I said, this couldn't come at a worse time when housing's expensive, when food's expensive, when energy's expensive, cars are expensive. Anything that you need to live right now is expensive, and energy is no stranger to that. And check this out. Electricity is one of the things that have gone up the most. And why is that? Well, because the cost of natural gas is through the roof right now. Electricity prices have jumped up about almost 14% from a year ago. And that makes your increase in your electric bill right now the largest one-year increase that we have seen since 1981. And if anybody remembers what happened back in 1981 was the last time we also had a recession and we had the worst inflation in history, which we can argue right now that maybe we had the second worst inflation in history, if not the worst, because the CPI was calculated differently back in 1981 than it is today. And now we're basically at the point where they're saying that Congress needs to act because we're reaching a point where energy prices are completely unaffordable. And if they don't do something about it, then you're going to be seeing millions of people across the country getting their utilities shut off over the next few months. And this goes right back to what I was saying the other day, guys. You know, they passed this 1.7 trillion with a T, trillion-dollar spending bill, and there is nothing in there for American citizens when it comes to helping pay these utility bills, helping with affordable housing, maybe giving home builders incentives or tax breaks to build homes that people can actually buy, in the $250,000 to $300,000 price range. Like, there's nothing like that in there for us. There's just all these other things in there that aren't really going to help anyone, but yet we all have to pay for. And we still can afford to give away billions of dollars to other countries in foreign aid when people can't pay their electric bill here in the United States. Does this make any sense? Because to me, it makes completely zero. And another thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, guys, is this massive push towards electric cars. And this is something that I have talked about a few times before, but the reason I'm bringing this up today is because even the CEO himself of Toyota came out this week and said, hey, you guys are wanting to push this whole electric car movement, but this is moving way too fast, because I can tell you one thing, the world is not ready for this. And that's not me saying this. This is the CEO of one of the largest automakers in the world, guys, saying this. And this is what he said. He said, well, look at the prediction that we're all supposed to be in driverless cars by now, and that obviously has not happened. And this is basically the same concept when it comes to electric, saying that all these cars need to be electric by a certain time frame. Well, the media wants people to believe that that's the case. But he said that the majority of automakers know that this is not possible and not a reality, and they just don't speak up about it. And that's why he finally came forward and said, yes, this is a problem, and there's a lot of issues with electric cars. And this huge winter storm has highlighted many of them, which we're going to talk about here. So the Biden administration is under the belief that if they throw enough subsidies at the electric car industry, that a lot of people are just going to go out and buy them. Well, they already saw how well that worked out with the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Whenever they gave people the $5,000 or $7,500 credit, whatever it was, to buy an electric car, and then all the electric automakers raised their prices by that amount. So that did a whole lot of good. In the Biden infrastructure bill, there was $7.5 billion allocated towards states beefing up their electrical grids in order to basically build more charging networks. But even the states are pushing back against this and saying we are not ready for electric vehicles to go mainstream right now. And one of the main challenges that has been highlighted very recently is the cold. Okay, this cold winter is shined a huge light on how problematic electric cars can be when temperatures get extremely cold. Now, since we had this massive cold snap across the country, here's what was found out about this. When temperatures drop to only 5 degrees Fahrenheit, electric vehicles only achieve 54% of their quoted range, okay? That is a massive loss in productivity of the electric car. And to put that into perspective, a vehicle that's supposed to be able to go 250 miles, which is pretty much the average for a lot of electric cars, that's now cut down to only 135 miles, guys. That's how far you can go on a charge when temperatures get that cold. To put this into perspective even further, a Tesla Model 3 under ideal conditions, which are warmer temperatures than that, can go about 282 miles on one charge, okay? But on a typical winter day, when it's only 32 degrees, which is the average temperature across most of the country in the winter time, that brings down your range for that Tesla Model 3 to only 173 miles on one charge. And then they go on to say, imagine if 100 million Americans that were traveling over the holidays took to the roads in their electric vehicles during this huge winter storm. They said that there would not be enough tow trucks, there would not be enough emergency vehicles to get these people who are now be stranded on the side of the road because their car is out of electricity, and on top of that, nowhere to charge it. And that this would be a giant disaster, okay? And what the transportation department wants all the states to do is they want all the states to build a charging station off the interstates every 50 miles, so that way this type of issue can be averted in the future, because apparently they're thinking ahead on this one actually, and they know that this can be a problem. But the states are pushing back and warning and saying that, wait a minute, we don't have the infrastructure or the capacity from our electrical grid to even do this. So how do you guys expect us to build these charging stations every 50 miles? I mean, here's what New Mexico had to say about this. They said that poor maintenance on these charging stations can lead to stations being perpetually broken and unusable, particularly in rural areas. And if EV charging stations are built in an area without electrical capacity to support it, that it will be unusable until the appropriate upgrades are installed.
You know, I get a kick out of this every time I see this. You have a house for sale. There's a house here, but they're like, yeah, don't worry about the old dilapidated house. We're just selling the land here. They tried getting almost $2.5 million for it back in August, dropped the price $500,000 down to $1,950,000. No buyers yet.
Arizona came out and said that private businesses might operate and build these charging stations so long as it's being paid for by the federal government. But as soon as they stop giving money for that, and as soon as the subsidies go away, essentially, that they might abandon those stations, and these charging stations could essentially become stranded assets, because if they're not profitable, if they don't make any money, especially in rural areas that aren't getting used as much, then what kind of private entity is going to want to take that on? Now, before you guys just say, oh, you're just attacking electric cars, and you know, I love my Tesla and this is good for the environment or whatever, it's not about that, guys. What this is about is common sense. As you might have seen from most of my videos, that the common underlying thread that I think most of my videos have, and I'm proud to admit, is common sense, okay? And it's anything but common sense to prematurely transition to an entirely new energy system before we actually are able to. And that's what a lot of these initiatives and pushes towards the electric vehicles are. They're pushes towards something that we're not ready for yet, okay? And you can tell that we're not ready for it just by what's going on with this. The Biden administration wants to build 500,000 charging stations, but states will have to spend their own money to keep them running. The federal government helps get them built initially, and now it's up to the states to keep them running, okay? But states don't want to take on this responsibility because it's a huge liability, and if this doesn't go well or the adoption doesn't go through the way that they want it to, then states are the ones that are going to be stuck with the bill on this. And there's just so many things that make this not a reality right now, because one of the only ways to get the money for these things is that a lot of the parts used to build the chargers need to be built in the US. However, there's only a handful of factories in the US that can actually do this right now, so that's another problem. And then check this out. There was a study done over the spring by the University of California, and they determined that more than 25% of the fast chargers in the San Francisco area were unusable. So imagine you have a gas car, just like I do, and probably a lot of people still do, and you go to a gas station and there's a 25% chance that they might not have gas. Do you think that's a sustainable way to run things or to be out driving a car safely? I mean, I don't. I wouldn't want to be wondering every time if I'm out on the road if the station's going to have electricity or a spot for me, or the equipment's going to be working because the state, maybe they can't afford to maintain it, or a private business gave up on it and now it's just some stranded charging station in the middle of the desert. No. And I've driven coast to coast, guys. I've driven all the way from here in Miami all the way up to San Francisco, okay? That's how far I drove last summer. So it is a lot of driving. It ended up being more than 10,000 miles round trip when you include all the sightseeing and things that we did. So I have been on the road. I have seen the country, and there is a lot of nothing in between here and there. You go through parts of the interstate and the highway where you don't see anything, guys, for 100 miles, okay? And that's normal across a lot of the parts of the country. So being able to just all of a sudden switch to electric cars in the next couple of years is completely unrealistic. That's what I'm hitting home at with this. Not that I'm completely against electric cars or anything like that. I'm just against making a transition that we can't actually afford right now. Because you know what the worst part about all of this is? You know who's going to end up paying for all of this? Yeah, you guessed it. You and me and everyone else who pays taxes. The taxpayers are going to be the ones to foot the bill for this, and yet another change that no one asked for, but yet we all have to pay for, you know? it's just getting insane. So let me know what you guys think about that. I don't really care if you're for or against electric cars. There's no need to write that in the comments. I want to know what your proposed solutions to this would be, because that's the real issue here, not whether or not you're in favor of electric cars. It's how do you handle getting all these cars charged across the entire country. And then you got to fight things like these massive cold fronts that come through and could leave people stranded. No matter how many charging stations are out there, if people get stuck on the road because it's bumper to bumper traffic, imagine when there's accidents and you can't move and the range on your car is dwindling by the minute and you get stuck, guys. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in that situation, would you? Now let's switch topics here for a minute. There was an interesting story I read today about baby boomers, and these are the top 5 big money mistakes and remorse stories that they have into their retirement years now that more and more baby boomers are retiring. And here's what it comes down to that they kind of regret spending money on in retirement, which could be a great lesson for all of us who are not retired yet. The first one is big spending on lavish vacations and taking too many expensive vacations after retirement, basically going overboard, which is understandable. You know, it's a common knee-jerk reaction when you're working for the last 50 years and maybe you only went on a couple vacations. Naturally, you're going to want to do things, see the world, whatever. But sometimes people end up spending too much money to the point where they're wiping out their retirement funds in just a few years going on all these fancy vacations. So that can be dangerous. The next one, and this is a real big one that can drain your wallet faster than probably the vacations, is buying a second home or a vacation home. Because a lot of people see this money that they have saved up for retirement like, wow, this is great. I can buy this, especially when prices were still low, you know, pre-pandemic, and interest rates were still reasonable. People could get into these properties for relatively low prices and find a good deal. But that doesn't change the fact that these properties take an arm and a leg to maintain, and paying 2 mortgages and maintaining 2 properties is not that easy for people in retirement. And the next big one that they spend the money on is a luxury car or an RV that really adds up to the cost of maintenance, which ends up being almost a bigger expense than the vehicle itself. Because when you buy a luxury car or an RV, just to maintain it, the oil changes, the parts that you might need for any type of repair are far more expensive than a lot of people realize. And you know, when you're going to be on the road with an RV, you got to keep that thing in tip-top shape so you don't get stranded. But here is the number one thing that they actually spend the most money on in retirement that they regret, and that is helping their adult children financially. And this goes both ways, and I made a whole video about this the other day, guys. Go watch it if you're interested. It's called Mom, Dad, Can I Live With You? Because that's the trend nowadays. You know, the younger generations are living at home more than ever before. And this study found that 79% of these boomers offer their adult children some sort of financial support. So maybe they're not living with them, but they're giving them money somehow. And this is making them spend their retirement money much faster than they anticipated. So that is a huge thing to look out for. And I know parents do this because they love their kids, and I get that. But, you know, when it's coming at your own expense, when you can't afford to live on your own anymore, then that's worrisome. So just some things to look out for when going into retirement. Now here's a really interesting holiday story for you guys, very timely, and that is the return policy of retail stores right now. So the interesting thing that's happening with a lot of retailers is, depending on the cost of the item that you bought, sometimes now if you want to make a return on something and it was like, say, you know, a set of a couple t-shirts, you know, or underwear, or some inexpensive item that maybe was like $30 or less, a lot of times they're just saying, you know what, keep it. We'll refund you the money and you don't have to return it. But this actually happened to my wife a couple times over the past few months. And now that I'm reading a whole story on this, the interesting thing is, one of the big reasons why retailers are doing this is because it's actually cheaper for them a lot of times to let you keep this cheap merchandise rather than they take it back and they have to send it back to their warehouse and inspect it and then repackage it and do all of this, or try to sell it secondhand, whatever they do. It ends up costing them more money, and there's like no value in that for the retailers, so much to the point where they're saying, you know what, it's on us, you keep it. Have you guys ever experienced this before? Because sometimes it's not even just with cheap items. I'm trying to remember what it was that they let my wife keep for free. It was either one of her dog strollers, I don't know, something like that, that wasn't that cheap, you know, but it was a large item. And they said that some items that they're also letting people keep are large items like this that are too difficult to accept for a return, you know, for people to move it around. It's just too much effort to move this thing. So yeah, go ahead and keep it. It's on us, guys. But it's not going to be that simple all the time, because 60% of retailers are modifying their return policies right now in an effort to try and mitigate and discourage returns. A couple of things that they're doing is 41% of retailers are now charging for return shipping. So if you buy something online, you have to pay to return it. In fact, that just happened to me recently. I bought some guitar stuff, and normally the website that I buy from, Musician's Friend, they always had free return shipping. Well, now they don't. If you want to return something, it's on you. So you can still return it, but the expense to return it is going to be on you. So that's the first thing. And on top of the return shipping being paid by the buyer, now they're also charging restocking fees, which is also something that Musician's Friend is doing. So these are new ways that retailers are discouraging people from returning items. So you might get lucky with this in the sense that you might be able to keep a few things that you weren't planning on, you know, keeping, that you wanted to return. Because moving forward, I'm personally going to be looking more into each store's return policy before I buy something online now. Because when you buy $100 item and you don't really want it anymore, but now you have to pay to return it, it's not as enticing to return it. You know, it's more of a hassle. It makes you think twice. It's happening to me. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to experience this now that return season is well underway here, because they say that January 2nd is officially called National Returns Day by UPS. So that's what they call it. Check the return policy. But before you think you're going to go out there and just start scamming all these retailers and buying inexpensive items and then trying to return it, just like everything else, guys, your purchase history is going to be watched a lot harder now than it ever used to be. These retailers are going to be keeping track of, you know, who you are, how you pay, you know, your credit card numbers, things like this, to basically keep track of who their customers are, how much they buy, how much they spend, how many returns they make. And a retailer can basically ban you from returns. You know, it's up to them. It's their discretion to say, hey, you're abusing our return policy, you can't return stuff with us here anymore. So before you think you're going to go out there and start a new criminal enterprise with this, make sure you realize that these guys are going to be watching you from now on. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you click the bell notification down below. YouTube will alert you every time I post a new video. And if you don't want to wait, check out my next one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.